Gianni Infantino wants to make the World Cup bigger again. Football's biggest voices are telling him no. FIFA just finished expanding the World Cup to 48 teams for the first time. And before the confetti even settled, talk of pushing it to 64 teams for 2030 started making headlines. Coaches, confederation presidents, and fans are pushing back hard. And this time it's not staying behind closed doors. So FIFA wants to go from 48 teams to 64 for the World Cup's 100th birthday in 2030. And the response from the people who actually run and play the game has been loud, blunt, and mostly negative. Let's start with what's actually on the table. President FIFA will examine a proposal to expand the 2030 World Cup to 64 teams, potentially adding another 16 nations to the tournament. That's not a rumor floating around a message board. That's the man in charge of world football saying it out loud. Here's exactly how he put it. A 64-team tournament is definitely an issue that will be examined and discussed in the relevant committees after this World Cup. Infantino said. He wasn't cornered into saying it either. This came from an interview with a Swiss outlet, not a press conference where a reporter forced his hand. And Infantino didn't just leave it there. He built a whole case for why bigger is better. That's definitely an issue that will be examined and discussed in the relevant committees after this World Cup. When organizing a World Cup, it's important to organize it for the whole world. Not just Europe and South America, but effectively the entire world. Every nation should be allowed to dream of participating in the World Cup. That's his whole pitch in a nutshell: access, dreams, inclusion. He's also using the current tournament as his proof of concept. It's been a huge success with 48 teams, he said. Every team played at a high level. Teams from every continent scored goals and earned at least 1 point. 9 out of 10 African teams reached the knockout stage. At the last World Cup, there were only 5 teams from Africa. In his mind, the numbers back him up completely. More teams, more countries in the knockout, more moments for nations that used to just watch from home. Now here's where the title of every headline this week comes from. This isn't Infantino operating in a vacuum. The South American Football Confederation had previously proposed a one-off 64-team tournament in 2025 to mark the World Cup centenary. At the time, CONMEBOL President Alejandro Domínguez said the expansion would allow more countries to participate in the anniversary edition, 100 years after Uruguay hosted the inaugural tournament. CONMEBOL didn't just casually suggest this, they pushed hard. The 64-team proposal gained significant traction following a move by Uruguayan official Ignacio Alonso and subsequent backing from CONMEBOL President Alejandro Domínguez, who has been vocal about his desire for a larger 2030 tournament, describing it as his dream and claiming such an expansion would unite the world just once. And there's a very practical reason South America wants this. Under the current 48-team plan, the 3 South American nations are only slated to host 1 match each. But a 64-team setup could see them host entire groups. So for Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay, going to 64 isn't just about football philosophy. It's about actually getting real World Cup matches on home soil for the tournament's 100th anniversary. But almost as soon as this idea got real traction, the room split. On one side, you've got FIFA's president and South America's federation pushing the dream angle. On the other side, you've got some of the most powerful men in football saying absolutely not. The loudest voice against it wears a UEFA badge. UEFA President Alexander Ceferin has previously labeled the prospect of a 64-team World Cup a bad idea. This proposal was maybe even more surprising for me than you, Ceferin said. I think it is a bad idea. It is not a good idea for the World Cup itself, and it's not a good idea for our qualifiers as well, he added. He's not alone. Asia's top football official jumped in with his own warning. Ceferin said it is a bad idea for both the tournament itself and the qualifying process. An Asian Football Confederation President Sheikh Salman bin Ibrahim Al Khalifa agreed, saying further expansion would bring chaos. And then there's the man who runs football across North and Central America and the Caribbean. Victor Montagliani, president of the governing body for football in North and Central America and the Caribbean, said the suggestion doesn't feel right and he believes the expansion would damage the broader football ecosystem. So right out of the gate, this isn't a quiet policy debate happening in a boardroom. It's Infantino and CONMEBOL on one side, dreaming of a bigger, more global centenary tournament. And it's the presidents of UEFA, the AFC, and CONCACAF on the other side, publicly telling him it's a mistake. That's 3 of the 6 continental confederations openly pushing back on the man who runs the sport globally. Now let's get into why so many people inside the game think this is a terrible idea. Because it's not just politics between confederation presidents. It's coming from the dugouts too, and from people who have spent their entire careers grinding through qualifying just to get a shot at this tournament. The most quoted man in this entire saga right now is a 73-year-old Portuguese coach who's been to more World Cups than almost anyone alive. Carlos Queiroz is currently in charge of Ghana, and after his team scraped into the knockout rounds of the 48-team tournament, he didn't hold back on what he thinks the expansion has done to the competition. Here's what he actually said, standing in a press conference after a loss. "I do believe that what really has huge value, huge and significant value, is that which is rare," Queiroz said. "I've never seen in my life common things, ordinary things that come with huge value. So the number of teams that qualify for the World Cup, I am afraid that it can turn this competition into a vulgar, ordinary competition." Vulgar and ordinary, those are strong words for the biggest tournament in the sport, coming from a man who's earned the right to have an opinion on it. Queiroz has been part of football at the very top for decades. He became only the second coach after the legendary Bora Milutinovic to appear at 5 consecutive World Cups, having taken Portugal to the 2010 competition and then Iran to the next 3 editions. He's also managed at Real Madrid and led South Africa to a World Cup of their own. When someone with that resume says the tournament is losing its meaning, people in the game listen. And Queiroz didn't stop at just calling it vulgar. He explained exactly why he thinks qualifying itself has become almost pointless in some regions. "You see in Europe, who is out of Europe in the qualification?" he asked. "So even the qualification matches in Europe, in Africa, they start to lose significance and meaning. Because everybody's qualified in South America, most of the European teams." Think about what he's describing. If nearly everyone from a region ends up qualifying anyway, then those grueling 2-year qualifying campaigns that used to define careers and end them start to feel more like a formality. That's the exact fear critics have about pushing to 64 teams. That it wouldn't just water down the finals, it would gut the meaning of qualifying entirely. There's also a financial and political layer to why Queiroz and others are suspicious of expansion in the first place. Going back to the original jump from 32 to 48 teams, Infantino's justification was that it increased access to the tournament so that more nations and fans could enjoy being part of the world's most popular sporting event. Critics, however, have suggested his real motivation was to boost FIFA's revenues and cement his position at the top of the game. That suspicion hasn't gone away with talk of 64 teams. More teams means more matches, more broadcast windows, more sponsorship inventory, more ticket sales. Nobody at FIFA is denying that a bigger tournament makes more money. The argument is over whether that's the actual driving force behind the plan, dressed up in language about dreams and access. Queiroz wasn't only worried about the numbers on paper either. He flagged something that affects the actual humans playing the games, player welfare. Queiroz, who also expressed his concern about what the extra games might mean for player welfare, added that he felt the World Cup qualifiers had also been devalued. More teams in the finals often means more matches, more travel, and a longer competitive calendar layered on top of already packed domestic seasons. Players' bodies don't get an extra gear just because FIFA wants extra fixtures. So you've got 3 separate threads of criticism forming here just from the coaching and playing side of the sport. 1. It cheapens the achievement of qualifying. 2. It's suspiciously convenient for FIFA's bottom line. 3. It puts even more strain on players who already complain regularly about fixture congestion. And that's before you even get to the logistical nightmare that a 64-team format would actually create. Now let's talk numbers, because once you actually sit down and do the math on a 64-team World Cup, you start to understand why UEFA, the AFC, and CONCACAF are so alarmed. Start with the basic scale of it. A 64-team tournament would mean more than a quarter of FIFA's 210 men's international sides would qualify, and would require several regional qualification processes to change dramatically, while others would likely be rendered pointless. That's not a small tweak to a format. That's a quarter of every single football-playing nation on Earth getting a spot in the finals. Break it down even further and it gets more striking, looking at FIFA's full membership. Having 64 teams out of 211 FIFA members means nearly 1 in 3 nations would be in the tournament, which is basically participation trophies for everyone. Whether you agree with that framing or not, the math is real. Going from 32 countries in 2022 to 48 this year to a potential 64 in 2030 means the World Cup would have doubled in size in under a decade. Now think about what that means for match count alone. Should CONMEBOL's 64-team proposal gain traction, the 2030 World Cup would feature an overwhelming 128 matches, a significant uptick compared to the 64-game format that dominated from 1998 to 2022. That's double the number of games fans, broadcasters, host cities, and players would need to handle, in a tournament that's already going to be spread across 3 continents. And that spread across continents is its own complication entirely. The 2030 tournament will be spread across 6 nations, as part of plans to mark the competition's 100-year anniversary. 1930 hosts Uruguay will hold 1 match, as will both Argentina and Paraguay at the start of the competition, with the remaining games split between Morocco, Portugal, and Spain, with the final set to take place at Real Madrid's Santiago Bernabeu Stadium. Even at 48 teams, that's already an enormous logistical puzzle. Stack another 16 teams and dozens more matches onto a tournament running across 2 continents and 6 countries, and you can see exactly why confederation presidents are calling this a headache waiting to happen. That's essentially Montegliani's exact objection. He's not against growth for the sake of growth. He's against rushing it before anyone's even evaluated what the last expansion did. Montegliani argues that the proposal is premature, particularly with the fresh 48-team format still to be evaluated. I don't believe expanding the World Cup to 64 teams is the right move for the tournament itself and the broader football ecosystem. From national teams to club competitions, leagues, and players, he stated. That word premature keeps showing up in different forms from different officials, and for good reason. UEFA President Alexander Ceferin is among those opposed to a 64-team tournament, previously calling FIFA's proposal a bad idea. It's not a good idea for our qualifiers as well, he told a media conference at the UEFA Congress last year. Qualifying isn't just a formality to these confederations, it's their competition, their revenue, their calendar. If 64 slots get carved up across regions, entire qualifying tournaments could lose their purpose overnight. There's also the matter of quality on the pitch, which is the thing casual fans actually notice when they tune in. The prospect of a 64-team World Cup has met stiff resistance from several high-ranking figures, with critics arguing that adding more teams devalues the qualification process and dilutes the quality of the finals, even under the current 48-team format that just debuted. That criticism was already being aimed at FIFA before a ball was kicked. The more convoluted format has resulted in a group state. That took 3 rounds of fixtures to eliminate just a third of all teams. And some detractors have also claimed that the quality of the tournament has been diluted by the increase in participants, while extra pressure is being put on players already under strain from packed playing schedules. So the math problem isn't abstract. It's more nations, more matches, more travel, more strain on players. And according to critics, less jeopardy in a competition. That used to be defined by how brutal it was just to get there. That's the case against 64 teams laid out in numbers rather than opinions. And it's exactly why the confederations aren't budging. Let's flip the lens now and look at who actually stands to gain from a 64-team World Cup, because this fight isn't just about football purity. There's real money and real politics tangled up in every side of this argument. Start with South America, since they're the ones who put the idea on the table in the first place. For CONMEBOL, this isn't abstract global inclusion talk. It's about getting real matches on home soil for a tournament they haven't fully hosted since the very first one a century ago. The 64-team proposal gained significant traction, following a move by Uruguayan official Ignacio Alonso, and subsequent backing from CONMEBOL President Alejandro Dominguez, who has been vocal about his desire for a larger 2030 tournament. Under the current 48-team plan, the 3 South American nations are only slated to host 1 match each, but a 64-team setup could see them host entire groups. This logistical shift would be particularly significant for South America, which faces a long wait before it gets anywhere near hosting rights again. Then there's Infantino himself and the accusation that keeps trailing him every time expansion comes up. Go back to when 48 teams was first approved. Approved in 2017 under FIFA President Gianni Infantino. The expansion was presented as a move to broaden global participation and give more nations access to the world stage. That's the official story. But the unofficial read from critics has stayed consistent for years, and it hasn't gone anywhere with the new proposal. More teams means more games, and more games has always meant more revenue for FIFA's coffers and more political capital for the man running the show heading into re-election cycles at the confederation level. Even fans who are open to a bigger tournament can see through this pretty clearly. One thing that keeps getting said around this debate, across message boards and interviews alike, is that this is fundamentally a business decision dressed up as a moral one. More teams equals more matches equals more broadcast revenue. And nobody at FIFA headquarters is pretending otherwise when the topic comes up in private. Now, not everyone thinks that's a bad thing. There's actually a surprising ally for Infantino sitting inside the US government. Andrew Giuliani, executive director of the White House's World Cup Task Force, said the United States could consider making a bid to host the 2038 World Cup and would be able to handle it if expanded to 64 teams. That's notable because the US just went through hosting the 48-team version this year, and their own event organizer is already signaling that scaling up further wouldn't scare them off. And that timeline matters here too. Andrew Giuliani, executive director of the White House's World Cup Task Force, is already open to the US potentially hosting 64 teams in 2038, which is now the next available tournament to bid for, after Saudi Arabia landed 2034 unopposed. His exact quote on the matter was simple confidence. "I think the United States can handle it," he said. So while UEFA, the AFC, and CONCACAF are drawing lines in the sand, you've got South America pushing hard for their own reasons. Infantino facing the same money accusations he's faced since 2017, and a potential future US host already signaling they're fine with whatever number FIFA lands on. That's a genuinely fractured landscape. Confederations against it, one confederation championing it, and a future host country shrugging and saying bring it on. There is one wrinkle worth pointing out amid all this noise. Despite Infantino publicly floating the idea and confirming it will be examined, there have also been reports suggesting his private appetite for actually pushing it through has cooled. Reports suggest that Gianni Infantino is not showing much enthusiasm for the idea internally, with RMC Sport claiming FIFA's president has reservations about enlarging the competition beyond where it already sits. Whether that's true caution or just political cover. While the confederations sort out their differences in public, nobody outside FIFA's inner circle knows for certain yet. So where does this actually leave things heading toward 2030? Right now, nothing is decided. Infantino has been careful with his language every single time this comes up, always landing on the word examine rather than promising anything concrete. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has opened up the possibility of a 64-team World Cup, saying plans will be assessed after the conclusion of the 2026 finals. That timeline matters. It means the decision doesn't get made this year or even next year. It gets made after everyone has had a full tournament cycle to watch the 48-team format play out completely, knockouts and final included, and to judge for themselves whether it delivered what Infantino promised. His argument going in was built almost entirely on the performance of teams from smaller footballing nations, and by his own account, that part of the experiment has gone exactly the way he hoped. Infantino said he considers the 48-team field to be a huge success. Every team played at a high level. Teams from every continent scored goals and earned at least 1 point, he said. 9 out of 10 African teams reached the knockout stage. At the last World Cup, there were only 5 teams from Africa. That just goes to show how important it is to include all teams, to give them this opportunity to participate. But success by that measure doesn't automatically win over the people who actually have to run the qualifying tournaments underneath it. Ceferin, Sheikh Salman, and Montegliani have all been consistent, and consistent from very early in this conversation, long before the 2026 tournament even kicked off. That means their opposition isn't a reaction to something going wrong on the pitch. It's a standing objection to the entire idea, regardless of how well the 48-team version performs. There's also the matter of what happens on the ground in South America if this doesn't go through. CONMEBOL's push for 64 teams was tied specifically to the centenary, framed by Domings as a once-in-a-century chance to bring the tournament back to where it all started in a bigger way. If FIFA's committees say no after the 2026 review, that dream doesn't just get delayed. For practical purposes, given how rarely hosting rights rotate back to any single region, it may not come around again in most of these officials' lifetimes. Meanwhile, the players and coaches caught in between the boardroom politics keep speaking up in real time, tournament after tournament. Queiroz made his comments in the middle of an actual World Cup run, while his own team was benefiting from the very expansion he was criticizing. That contradiction hasn't gone unnoticed either, and it says something about how complicated this issue really is, even for the people living through it. Ghana made the knockouts because of the exact format he called vulgar, and he said so himself, telling his players plainly that the group stage was just the warm-up, and the real tournament was still to come. So this isn't a story with a tidy ending yet. FIFA has committed to examining a 64-team World Cup after this year's tournament wraps. The federations that control European, Asian, and North American qualifying have already made their opposition public and specific. South America has its own reasons for wanting this to happen, tied to history and to hosting matches on home soil for the first time in generations. And the coaches and players stuck navigating whatever format gets handed to them keep pointing out the same tension, that every expansion so far has opened doors for nations that never used to get a look in, while simultaneously making it a little harder to say what actually makes qualifying for the World Cup special in the first place. Whatever FIFA's committees decide after 2026, this fight over 64 teams isn't going away quietly. It's already split the sport's most powerful people right down the middle. And by the time anyone makes a final call, an entire cycle of qualifying campaigns around the world have been shaped by not knowing which format they're even playing for.